Well, our boy is back, everybody. Yes, sir, he is. I am proud, I am happy, I am honored to bring to you guys a bit of an early one as to I got to get a chance to experience this. And this is going to be a slightly longer non-spoiler review to kind of set up where I'm coming from with this film. But I'm going to do a non-spoiler review, a non-spoiler, if you will, preference and setup to a film I might actually think this is a modern masterpiece. This is going to... Now, look, here on the channel, you know I don't like to hype up movies. Even Nick Cage movies, I try to give a fair critique to. As you guys know, I'm a huge Nicolas Cage fan. But this, folks, might actually be the single best performance, not just by Nick Cage, but by all involved in this project. This is going to severely shake up the landscape of horror films, and this is going to define the genre. And I know people have hyped this thing up, and it's more of a see it to believe it. So let me give you guys some background on what we're working with and who this film is by before I get into my overall critique. This film is directed by Osgood Perkins. If you don't know who Osgood Perkins is is the son of the great Anthony Perkins, who was the killer in Psycho. And I never knew he had a son, but his son is the director. Now, I have not seen Osgood Perkins' other films, so I can't critique those. But let me give you a quick cast synopsis. You have Mika Monroe, who, if you don't know who she is from one of my favorite movies, which is It Follows. And, of course, you have Nicolas Cage. You also have Blair Underwood as well in this film. And then there is Elisa Watt, Dakota Dublin, Kierkegaard Shipka. If you guys don't know who she is from the Chilling Tales of Sabrina. And Kierman Shipka actually did one of the best original takes on the character of Sabrina that I had seen in a long time. You have Jason Day, you have Ava Kelders, Carmen Ahmet, Peter James Brandt. So, this has a pretty interesting cast. And I want to preference something before I get into this review. Because this review is going up a week ahead of the movie, I do not want to give away any details. So I'm going to read you guys a vague synopsis that I could find on this movie because there's nothing else out there. And honestly, you should go into this movie completely blind with no knowledge. So I'm going to give you guys a brief synopsis that I pulled to kind of give you a vague idea of what this film is about. And I'm even going to omit some stuff from the synopsis because I do not want anybody to be spoiled with anything. So there are no spoilers. I'm not going to give details in the movie. I'm just going to give my overall impressions and the acting and cinematography and things like that. So first off, directed by Osgood Perkins, the son of Anthony Perkins. And I got to say, Osgood he's coming out with a banger. I know he's done other movies, but this is his big coming out movie. And what a way to come out. Let me tell you something. So what is LongLegs about? People have seen big marketing. What is the premise behind this movie? LongLegs is about, in the 1990s, an FBI agent named Lee Harker, played by Mika Monroe, was assigned to an unsolved case involving a satanic serial killer only known by his acronym LongLegs. As the investigation becomes more complicated with occult evidence uncovered, Harkin must put together the pieces of the puzzle before another family murder happens. So, what can I tell you about LongLegs without ruining it? I can give you the basic premise, or the basic thing is that the individual offs entire families, and due to the very horrific nature of his murders, the case hits a brick wall due to some things, and Lee Harker is brought in as somebody who is gifted. She's able to, she kind of has a thing like, how do I explain this? Will Grant in the show Hannibal. Her mind kind of works like that. That's the best way I could describe it. And so I've heard comparisons to this movie. I've heard Hereditary thrown out there. And I think the thing with people doing comparisons in this movie is that nobody has seen anything to this. But I have, folks. I have. So what can I compare this movie to? And I'm going for the biggest comparison you can make, the biggest compliment you can give a film. This movie is a lot like one of my favorite movies, Silence of the Lambs. This may, in fact, be Nicolas Cage's version of Hannibal Lecter. Now, they're two very different characters, and like I said, I'm not getting into any plot details. I really can't tell you much about anything having to do with Nick Cage in this film. But what I can say is, this is by far unlike anything I've ever seen Nick Cage do. I am a huge Nick Cage fan. I've seen The Rock, I've seen Face Off, I've seen National Treasure, Snake Eyes, I've seen shit people probably have never seen The Bad Lieutenant. This performance is by far Nicolas Cage's most unique, disturbing as shit performance I've ever seen. And I don't mean Nick Cage does not overact in this movie. You all know what I'm talking about. He does this crazy kind of thing. Nick Cage does have those mannerisms, but it's as if the director of this film built this movie based on a very dark, evil version of what Nick Cage would be. And let me get to the performances. So let me start first with Micaiah Monroe, who plays the detective. She is amazing. If you guys have ever seen the movie It Follows, you could tell by watching that film that she has a very wide range of acting ability. She's able to convey a lot of different emotions. She's able to make different facial features, and she's able to stress different things, and it really shows in her performance. But this is on another level. Her character, okay, I'm going to be making a lot of references here because the best reference I can give you if you want to go into this movie and have a vague clue is it's a lot like Silence of the Lambs on steroids. This movie has, now I will say it's gory and it's violent, but don't go in expecting a brutal, just vicious, violent movie. That's not what this is. This is a Detective 7, Silence of the Lambs, all those kinds of movies. It's that kind of a thing. You're following a mystery and you are part of the case. And the thing that's interesting about this movie is not just the serial killer aspect of it that's interesting, but the way they choose to present evidence in this film. The character of Lee Harker is very much us. And as audience members, you find out clues with the detective. There's nothing hidden, and there's nowhere in this movie where you could go, I didn't see it coming, because you are literally unearthing clues with the detective as she is, and you are literally following her POV. So I think the smart thing they do in this movie is they make you feel like you are gathering information as the character is gathering information. And in order for a movie like this to work, in order for movies like Silence of the Lambs or Sevens or any of those to work, the mystery needs to be engaging, but you also need to feel like you are a part of that mystery. If you can't place yourself in the investigation process, then a movie like this falls apart. And that's just one piece of the many pieces that this film is expertly juggling there's horror, there's dread, there's a very Hereditary mix in there. Like I said, people were comparing this a lot to Hereditary. There is a plot point that harkens back to it, but it to me is a refinement of everything we've gotten in the past 10 years from elevated horror. And yes, this is an elevated horror film, so don't expect to go in and bam, you're going to be given answers right away. This is a very slow burn, but the thing about this being a slow burn and as meticulously crafted as it is that there is a feeling. So I want to give a shout out to one of the best characters in the film. And the best character in the film is the atmosphere. It has been, God, years since I have seen a film that has unnerved me so very deeply. And the thing about the movie is, it's not necessarily the gore or the carnage or the reveals that are unnerving, but don't get me wrong, they are unnerving. And when this movie comes out next week, if you guys want, I will do a full in-depth spoiler review and break down the exact things that deeply disturbed me about this film. But it's more than just the sum of its parts. It's more than just scenes. It's the constant tension from the very first frame to the very last frame. This movie does not let you feel comfortable whatsoever. The opening of this movie has got to be one of the most unnerving openings I've seen in a movie in a very long time. And it's got to be, because when you do your act one, as they call it, you need to hook your audience. And I can guarantee you the first 10 to 15 minutes of this film is a straight up holy shit moment where you're standing in absolute just shock at what is happening. And very much what the movie does is give you a sense of feeling as helpless as the people are in these particular predicaments. What also makes this unnerving is what this killer is trying to achieve, what their overall goal is. And the targets is meant to hit you at a deep level, at a human level. And so when you get the opening moment, it sets you in this place of overwhelming dread. And for the hold on, let me look up the runtime, because I'll be honest with you, for the 101 minutes you are in the theater, you are glued. When this got done, there were people that were sitting down closest and nobody said anything. This is one of those movies where you look at the person next to you and you realize you have seen something truly. It's going to be, I believe this movie is going to be in talks with masterpieces like Silence of the Lambs or Seven or any of those great movies that have made a cultural impact. And I do not do hyperbole lightly on my channel. I do not gas things up to say this is going to be the greatest thing ever. Like I did it for Dune 2 and it deserves it and I will die on that hill. But this movie might be unbeatable this year for horror. It might go into the realm of untouchable. This movie is such a tense, atmospheric, just force of nature, from its performances to the score to the cinematography to the acting. This movie does not drop the ball in any of them. To what the mystery is, everything about this movie, at least for me, was perfect. It was unexpected, and it totally does not go where in my mind I thought it was leading. It goes, the end of this movie might be the most talked about ending of this year. I'm just going to say that. This might be Nicolas Cage's defining performance. And I don't say that lightly. My boy Nick has done lots of stuff, but this may be one of those characters like National Treasure or the Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Like, this might actually define Nick Cage as an actor. And I say that like, and quite honestly, if he is not nominated for an Oscar or something for this role, then you might as well have taken Silence of the Lambs out of the Oscars. Because to me, and I do not say this lightly, to me, his performance makes Anthony Hopkins look like a teddy bear in that movie. Honest God's truth, from his look to his mannerisms to his speech to what his motivations are. This may be Nicolas Cage at his top. If he retired on this movie, this would be the career-defining role for Nick Cage. And the shame part is, in this review, I can't tell you anything about exactly what the whole shtick is. I don't even really want to tell you how he looks, where his appearance is. I don't want to give anything away. I want you guys to go in blind, but let me just say this. There's a lot of criticism with Nick Cage. And the biggest one is people say Nick Cage acts like Nick Cage. I've heard this argument 1,000 times. But this might be the role where, quite honestly, he is unidentifiable. And I mean, not like you don't know it's Nick Cage. I'm talking performance-wise. This is not the Nick Cage we know. I recently watched a movie called Sympathy for the Devil with Nick Cage in it, and he played a mob boss or whatever. I did a review. Go check it out. And this might be him channeling shades of that performance into this performance, or I don't even know. Maybe he was just having a bad day. I have no clue. But this is by far Nicolas Cage's best performance. And let's not just stop with Nicolas Cage. The other big standout of this film is Mika Monroe, who got famous off of the movie It Follows. And I knew from when I watched her in that film that she was something special and something to watch out for. But her in this movie she is so good in this movie. So Mika Monroe plays Lee Harker, the FBI agent assigned to this case. And she has to have this kind of balance of very stern and serious, but emotional, but also having this thing that she does when she looks at these cases to where you can feel for her, because 90% of this is through her POV. We are literally investigators investigating a case with her. So you have to be locked into your main character or this all falls apart. And I would say it's a really tough call between who brings the best performance, because the way her and Nick interact in this film is like chemistry I've never seen. And I don't mean chemistry like Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs. It's not that kind of chemistry, but chemistry between these two characters is so engaging and so fascinating. And when the reveals happen and the different things are coming, the way she portrays this character is quite chilling within itself. Everything about this movie is fucking unsettling. Like, every single thing about this film. And I do warn you, if you're not a horror fan, you're not gonna enjoy this movie. But I do think too, if you're a fan of the detective genre, this is one of the best detective kind of stories and crime dramas that I think I've seen in years. But more than that, they mix the element of horror so perfectly. I'd say they balanced the line between horror and detective story better than Seven or Silence of the Lambs. This has such a scary, oppressive feel to it right from the beginning. Like, I mean, right from the opening till the close, it is so intense, even in the quiet moments. And that's the thing about horror movies that can make or break a horror film, is when you're away from the action and you're just trying to figure out what's going on. Am I engaged? Do I want to know? And like I said, the main star of this movie is the atmosphere, because that is the thing that keeps you feeling like something is going to happen constantly, even though you're just looking over photos or whatever else. And I think it's important for a movie to hit its atmosphere. Now, the shooting of this movie is quite interesting. This movie was shot in Vancouver, and British Columbia. And the cinematography that Osgood Perkins gets is absolutely gorgeous. This movie is even more haunting for the Vancouver setting because of the contrast between the bright and vivid, snowy, kind of everyday feel of this community, contrast to the killer and this dark, foreboding thing that's going on in the background. And I think the greatest thing that they did was shoot this in such a lit kind of environment, because when the horror happens, it's even more terrifying, contrast to the beauty of the outdoors and the nature and the things that you see. This is a very beautiful place with a very dark secret that's going on in this community. And I know I'm intentionally very vague in this review because honestly, you have to go into this movie not knowing much, and that is the excitement of this film. And I'm really glad no one has spoiled anything or given anything away, and I'm not going to do it here. But I will say, when you see the opening, either you're going to be in or out, and I'm gathering 90% of the people were in because it's so haunting and visceral, but there's a curiosity to why, because of how the film drops you just into this thing without any explanations, and bam, you figure it out. And it's like, holy shit. It's one of those things where when I was a kid, the first movie I saw with my father was Alien 3. And I know for most people that's not scary these days, but I was younger, and this was one of the first movies that I seen besides Matt Dillon's The Blob. And I remember the feeling of feeling completely terrified seeing this film. Now, I watch it now, and it's not the best Alien in the trilogy, but I'll always have a love for it because it was the first movie that scared the ever-loving shit out of me. And this movie gave me that feeling that I hadn't felt in years, which is the feeling of being completely scared. And I would suggest seeing this in the theater because the dark environment and being around other people and seeing their reaction, there's a lot of gasps and things like that. This goes for it. And I will say this much. There is, like I said, this isn't about brutal violence or gore that much, but when you get what you get, it's done in such a way that it is horrifying. Even the premise is horrifying because it could be very much in our world. And I think that's what makes this the scariest, is the subject that this movie is tackling, is the feeling of being in a community and having this dark thing happening and being completely powerless and unable to stop it and depending on somebody to figure out what's going on. And I think that the movie captures that feeling. And more importantly, it captures the audience and locks them into that feeling of helplessness. And I think that contributes to a lot of the tension and dread that permeates through most of this movie. And I'll tell you what, this is one of those movies that I think is a masterpiece, but I think is going to be very much dependent on whether or not you could handle the kind of movie that it is. Because while it's not crazy and trying to go out there and be a bloody, gory thing and get you with brutal kills, this movie does something that I think encapsulates what horror is supposed to be, and it traps you in the sense of dread, and it does not let you go. It makes you feel oppressed and angsty for the whole entire movie until the very last moment, and even then there's no relief. And it's one of those kinds of movies where I think the only movie that came this close, and once again the Silence of the Lambs comparison, I think Silence of the Lamb was the only other film that I seen that came close to the feeling I've gotten in this film. And I'm talking like, this is what, 10, 20 years ago. This might be the best movie in the past 20 years. And I just don't mean on a horror level. This right now is going to be tough for any movie that I watch to top. But I mean in movies in general. This is well shot. It's well paced. The music is haunting. The acting is powerful and poignant. And the atmosphere and cinematography is outstanding. and the visuals are just so hauntingly beautiful. This might be, for me at least, one of, if not the best of 2024. And I say that in all seriousness. And congrats to Nick Cage. This might actually be Nick Cage's finest performance. This might, I mean, if him and what's her face, if him and Mika Monroe don't get nominated for something, then the Oscars are what they've always been, a joke. This movie is going to hit. I project next week this is going to come out of the gate swinging. This has got to be one of, if not the scariest horror movies of this year. And it's going to be very hard for anything to top this movie, just in my opinion. And I know I've been vague, and I'm sorry for that, but if I tell you anything or I give you any kind of scenes or anything to drive home my point, I would ruin the film. This is the kind of movie you got to go in without any knowledge of what you're watching and piece it together as you watch it for the best viewing experience. But this, I know this is a 26-minute vague review, but it's all I can do without spoiling the experience for you. So I highly recommend this, and I am going to give this movie a perfect 10. This movie does everything a movie can do in its runtime to peak perfection. There's not one slow moment, one bad scene, one thing I can think of that sticks out from the beginning to the end, from what the characters want to what the final resolution is. Everything in this movie leaves you in a state of disbelief from beginning to end. And I think that is what horror is supposed to be. And I think that's what a lot of these horror movies have been reaching for. And unfortunately, they've been just short. And this movie, to me, got it. Whatever it is, this movie has it. It's a perfect 10. This might be my movie of the year, of several years. I even would put this over my two favorite movies, Parasite and Joker. Like, this movie, honestly, is a masterclass, and it's crazy that this director, this is only like his second movie. I cannot imagine the bright future that Osgood Perkins has in Hollywood, because, my goodness, the man has an eye for cinematography, for editing, for music, for landscape, for performances, and for getting the best out of his directors. Like, everybody behind this project brought the A game. They brought the A++ game. They brought S tier, God tier level, just writing, directing, everything. Osgood Perkins also wrote this story, and I want to give a shout out because, as far as I know, this is an original piece by this guy. And if this is like his third try, then my goodness, this man has got a bright future. Now, I know people have been waiting for me to do Maxine, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to get to the theaters to watch that. I will be bringing that soon. I also got one more review on one of the most god-awful movies I've seen, so stay tuned for that. But I wanted to start out with the best movie. This is a perfect 10. Next week it premieres. It'll be premiering in some theaters Thursday, but it'll be in all theaters Friday. I would highly, highly suggest you go see this in the theater, and don't see this alone. Go take a friend. Go take a family member. Take someone who's a fan of horror. Bring a pillow in case you got to squeeze something, because this has got to be the scariest, most intense movie of this year. And I'm just going to put it out there. Unless Nosferatu beats this out for me by Robert Eggers, I do not think, like, spoilers, this is right now my number one for the year of horror. This is my number one. I don't foresee anything touching how masterful this movie was shot, directed, acted, scored. There's nothing, folks. If you've seen this and you've got any suggestions, or you're like, nah, Zod, you're hyping it up, let me know in the comments below. But honestly, I think this might be the top horror movie of 2024. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you liked that video, hit that like button, hit the thumbs up, go share the love. Also, this Wednesday, we will be returning back again with a tier list. Who knows? It could be on your favorite Star Wars heroes. We'll keep you posted on that. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. And as always, remember, there's only one rule here in the Fandom Zone. Kneel before General Zod.